I have a need to export data through Excel file and also import data through Excel file. Currently, we can do that using a JSON, but really JSON isn't a business friendly. So from a business perspective, a lot of them like to use Excel. So I have a need to be able to import and export data through Excel file. So I create a module or a feature that allows me to do such a thing. It's not really 100% ready, but it does the job right now. Um, so anyway, so there's a feature I enabled to allow me to do such a thing. And what I did, I also created a content type here called product and product categories just for the sake of this demo. So really these products are just basically I put fields just so we can kind of see how this works. You can even add parts if you want. But in this case, I only added fields just because I put something real quick for the sake of this demo. Um, so so I have this, like for example, this price field right here is required. Um, these fields are not required, but this one is, just so I want to show the validation process as well. So what happens here, there's two properties. One of them allow you to import and one of them allow you to export. So if you want to import only but not export the data, you can. Or if you want to allow both, you can. If you don't want to allow import, you can. So anyway, so there's a setting right here that allow you to import or export. So in this case, I'm saying I want to allow product to be exported, but the product categories, it's not exportable right now. So I just left it alone right now. Um, so there is two menu items under content, and one of them is called import, and then the other one is export. And import, it tells you here import product because product was marked importable. So I can click on here, and if you look at this screen, everything here is generated based on the definition. So here you can allow, well, you can upload the file, but right under it, it tells you the requirement of what this file needs to look like in order for the system to understand it. So as you can see here, there's the name of the column that it should contain, whether it's required or not. As you can see here, price is required, and there's a description. And these are all derived from the schema or from the product type. You can actually also download it. So if you want to get a template, you can click on download here, and it will allow you to, uh, let me open that file so I can kind of show. Do you see that file that I exported? Can you guys see the Excel file on my screen?
No.
No.
Nope.
Let me stop the share and share the entire screen. I think that's what I did wrong. 1 second, sorry. Where's my entire screen? There. Okay. I think you might see that now.
Yeah, good.
Okay, good. So this is a file that I exported, which is just a template. It gives you the header name, and also if you highlight over it, you'll have some description about what each one really means, whether it's required or not, things like that. So anyway, we don't care about that. This is just a template. But I created also a file on the side which kind of adhere to this, so we can import it. So I just put in some data in here so we can see how that works. So there's three items that I'm hoping to import. There's a title, description, there's quantity for one of them, there's category. This category is a content picker field, and I'm putting text. I'm not putting an ID. So that we have to take the text, convert it to ID, and store it. So I'm gonna show you how that works. So here's a file. I believe that's the file, and we're going to do upload. So I just uploaded it, and what happened here is that um, they're all collapsed, and the reason why they're collapsed is because there's no error. If one of these fields is erroring, this will become red, and it will export or uncollapse it, make it visible so people can make the correct changes. So in here, I still have the chance to change whatever it is I want to change if I want to. And if not, I can just go ahead and proceed. So if I want to change this to 20, I don't know, I realize, oh, it's a mistake. I can go ahead and change it. And then I can go hit process. And then there's 3 products were successfully imported. So if you go to items, there's your 3 products that were just created. So, you know, if we go back and we actually delete those, just gonna re-import the file with errors just so you can kind of see. So import the file again, same file. No, that's the wrong file. That's the template. So we're gonna do this, and we're gonna leave this blank, and maybe the last one blank, just for kicks and giggles. And we're gonna hit process. That's not gonna let me do it. Anyway, there is server-side validation. That's what I was trying to achieve. Let me see if I can do this real quick. And I believe this one needs to have value. Okay, there you go. So I just triggered, kind of forced my server-side validation. So I allowed the post request, and in this case, what happened, you'll see that this one is visible because it contains errors, and the rest are still fine because there's no errors there. And so this one tells you you have to correct the issue, which is if the price is required. So I just did that just to show the server-side validation. And again, if I import it, boom, and it's all imported. Similarly, I can export. So you can export here, and here you can select which type you want to export. And because product is the only exportable type, it's here. So I can say, hey, I want to export product, and hit export. And I should, if everything works as expected, get this file right here. And so with this file, you have, you know, a content ID. I made those 2 columns exportable, and then there is the data that I exported. So again, this is not something for everyone, but from a business, you know, they're not gonna understand JSON or how to generate a JSON file to import data. And so this makes that process much easier if they want to import large amount of data or whatever kind of data they want to manipulate using Excel, then they can do it using this feature. So hopefully you guys like what you saw. So yeah, if you have any questions, fire away.
Super useful, I think, for lots of people. And yeah, there is always a time where you need to move data from existing system, or you need to export, like indeed. CSV is a good choice because it works in Excel also, and it works everywhere. And that's usually what you get as an input also when you get from other systems. I would not have used this flow in the UI personally, but I don't export and import Excel, so I'm just into how I would have liked to see it. I don't think being able to edit before it's imported is very useful. Well, comparatively to the amount of work to be able to handle every cases, it's a lot, I think. Just saying like validating everything and showing all the errors, and then saying, okay, either you fix the entries or I will just ignore these entries. I think that would have been sufficient.
Maybe that could be an option during the import. You know, hey, you can say allow or not allow and things like that. But in my case, I want to adhere to whatever the definition says. So if the definition says it's required, then hey, I'm going to require it. Otherwise,
no. I mean, it's that I agree with that. I don't think that being able to edit in place before it's imported is necessary. I still agree that you need to validate the data before it's imported, but at least when you get the CSV, you just output the list of errors and not the editor for each item. And this way they can say, they can either update their Excel file and fix the values in the Excel file or in the import, or they could say, no, go on still with it, or just ignore the items with issues. The fact that you let people edit and change and fix, I think it's too much in terms of support.
Well, it is too much, you're right. And I think it's an issue because obviously it's a giant data.
Also, yeah,
but
in the UI.
But I mean, at the same time, how you're gonna assure that the user, hey, you imported 100 rows, but here you only see in 10 because the 10 have errors, right? So
well, you can list one line per item with a and then show like green checkbox, or just to show the data that is not just what I'm saying is the editor itself, I think, is too much. Showing the data, displaying everything is fine, but the editor is a lot of work. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I personally don't know how to get around it, but I mean, it's an issue. Yes, I get it. I mean, I am facing it because if you're importing a lot of data, there's a lot of data being rendered on the screen, and that makes obviously the browser very slow and laggy. And I get that, but
so maybe you need a custom UI that is paged. So when you submit the CSV is stored in a way on the server, in a temporary table or in a custom table that you have, that is like data to be processed. And then you can, for this import, you can then display all the data, page data, and then just say, okay, process that. And then when you click process, there is a background task or even the same transaction that processes all the data afterward. So there is like 2 steps: first upload and then process. Maybe.
Well, that's what I have today, but I think what you're saying to also paging it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have pagination right now, but I mean, essentially there is an import process that actually takes the data, converts it to content types, and then I basically render the content type in an editor mode. So whatever the editor mode is, that's what you're gonna get. But instead of one item, you're doing it for many items. Maybe it could be very helpful to say, hey, ignore the content items that have no errors, and just keep those in the memory. So whenever you do the post, you still grab the valid ones from the memory and create them. Because at the minute you import the file, and you render on the screen, at that point everything in memory, nothing really was. Weird. Yeah. Well, what's weird?
That's why I'm mentioning. We say memory. I would have said store in the database, but in a different table, such that you have some state that people can update and then say, okay, go on with that thing. So the import is something in the database. It's not yet imported, but it's like in a state that you can manipulate the import data and go back to the server and do background imports. So when you post the CSV, this thing is stored in the database in whatever format you want. And then when you say, okay, everything is good, perfect, do the actual conversion now from the import state into the content items. 2 phases with a different table. So
if I may interrupt, this import could be same as SQL Server import. When a preview of import was run and we have a message that these rows are valid.
Exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. So if you haven't seen that, Mike, check how SQL Server provides imports even of CSVs and stuff. So because it shows an intermediate result, like telling you, oh, this thing doesn't work or will work, and with all the rows, and then you can say, you can act on that and then go on. It's 2 steps.
Yeah. So you're saying just put the like if you have the content item object, let's say, store that in a table, right? Maybe a different document collection. Store that there, and then have another page that lists everything that is not processed yet to the screen, and then let the
Yep.
user
Yeah.
go through it and say, okay, you can go ahead and proceed with those. Let me
Yes.
fix those errors and move on.
People
makes
can check each item or not, evict, say remove. It's like a temporary paper. It's like an Excel sheet, like but on the UI, and then you can say, okay, evict, remove, done, and okay, go on. And when it's stored, it doesn't even have to be content items or document table. It can be a list of JSON documents with all the properties. Like you convert the CSV into JSON. It can be as many JSON documents or one big JSON document. It would be better to be as many JSON documents because you don't know what the CSV fields will be. So the table has to be generic. So it's just a list of JSON documents, aka like maybe SQL documents or whatever. And yeah, and this way you can display all of them. That would be nice. And I have a different comment about import export. Whenever I see that, I want to be able to change the shape of the columns and the data and maybe add columns. Meaning like when I export data, I like to be able to provide a script that lets me define what are the new columns or the new fields and what are the values of these fields. Because you might not want to map field per field, but you might have to transform the data. Like if the system, output system needs like 2 columns, two CSV fields based on one of your fields, right? So it would be great to be able to provide a script that will actually get the content item as input and provide an array or a dictionary of values as an output that will be converted to CSV.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like defining fluid properties or something like that.
It will be JavaScript. Yeah.
Yeah.
This case.
Okay.
And same thing for the import. Such when you get a list of Excel fields, then you can say, oh no, convert like field A and B, create field C, which is the concatenation of A and B. Same thing with JavaScript. So you can transform an input because again, probably the system that push the data to your system, they don't match and they can't be configured, but you can configure it because it's super flexible. So that would be another option.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And that's super easy, right? Because you just for each every row, you provide it as a JSON document with all the fields, and you say, hey, give me the JavaScript, and you just process JavaScript, and it output and it changes the list of fields, and you're like, okay, that's the actual CSV, and done.
Why don't you use a liquid template for this?
No, I don't agree with that, and that's what also Mike suggested. Liquid would be nice to be able to export some text, and then you will build CSV. Fine, that will work. But if you say that the export is always CSV, then it's better to provide a JavaScript just to manipulate the data, to be able to create new properties and values instead of generating a CSV format, which is harder because you have to inject the colon to format the thing, the double quotes, and you are limited to the Thread thing. So it's just to create one line. You just want the Thread template to create one line. I think it's useless to use liquid in this case. It's better to use JavaScript to just manipulate the data because it's just data. It's a list of field values, key values. That's it.
But then you go to a query definition. I mean,
and you can also expose this module with query definitions also. Sure. Like you could say you want to export this query as a source. So what Mike showed is that you can select a content type. I'm like, that's nice, but I think it would be even better to expose queries instead of content types, because a query, you can do a content type, but you can also export anything from the system. So if you have a query that is sent to a JavaScript that is then converted to CSV, you have everything. It's harder in terms of UI because you have to create a query before being able to export. At the same time, it's super flexible because you can create any query, even Lucene, whatever, and then you have data as JSON documents. You can convert them using JavaScript to reorganize the data, like transform the data, and then this data, you save it as CSV and you send it to the user. Done. It's like GraphQL++, but CSV QL++.
I have a question. I don't know if, so I'm running into an issue with this, right? In I have a production environment on Azure, running on Azure. Only have a single instance because it's expensive. Anyway, so when I import, like I import data locally, and it runs just fine. It takes, I'm thinking about 30 seconds to import like, I don't know, 500 records or something like that. I don't know. A lot of it is a render time. But then when I run the same thing on Azure, yeah, I get a gateway of 504, which means
Timeout.
something, a service. Yeah, it's a timeout. Can't understand what kind of service, because at that point I'm not even targeting databases. So when you hit import, all you're doing is really reading the Excel file into a data table, and then you're basically calling service or handlers that know how to handle these fields or how to map them. So I'm not sure what could it be.
Yeah, and that's why I'm suggesting to have it in a table and to have a background task, because if you do it as part of the request itself and you have lots of data, you will time out at some point. There will be a limit of data that will time out. So you have to download the file and then process it. Maybe it's good enough to process it in the request, but it's also limited. So maybe just create a background task that will process the import and create it in the database in the custom table. And this is all done in background. So your requests, they are like doing nothing now. You could just have instead in your view a JavaScript ping that will send the request every second to ask if the file is ready to be imported. And then when it's ready, then you can redirect to the page that shows the full data because it will be database. But that's the issue. If you do something in the same request, in the request that's posting the thing, then you will time out, whatever the solution is. And it happens that on Azure, you have maybe 2 or 4 cores max, and it's much slower than your machine. So you are hitting issues. And the network is also real network, so you're hitting timeouts everywhere. So you need to do background tasks using the background jobs in Orchard or something else. And provide a UI that will just ping the server to ask for the status of the task, and then just show that it's processing with something that's pinged or saying processing and click to refresh. And then when it's processed, the server will have the state in the database, and then you can say, okay, it's processed, so you can redirect the client to the page that shows the result.
Would you upload the file and put the file itself in the queue for background?
Yeah, I think so. I think you need to do that because you have the 2 issues, which is ingesting the data in database to create a temporary import, and then ingesting the import rows into content items. And these 2 things might take a long time each if the file is huge. So these 2 things have to be different background jobs, one to ingest and one to convert CSV to content items. So yeah, you can say when you upload, you save the file, so it's super quick. And then at that point, you create a job that you can request from your client in Ajax. The status.
Yeah. I think the only thing I have to do is actually do validation when the file is imported, because if someone gives you a file that doesn't match the content type that you're importing, you want to error that because you can't process it. So maybe what you'll do, you'll upload that file into data table and then validate it. And then once it's validated, somehow write that file on the server until it's processed. And then once it's processed, you can delete that file, I guess.
In my mind, it will be a file on the file system.
Right.
Then a background job that imports the file into a temporary table. Then when it's done, the client knows, okay, all the data has been imported in a temporary table. At that point, you can delete the file. Then you show the result of the validation, because during the transformation from the file to the temporary table, you can do the validation and have a status on each row of the validation. So you can display it on the UI. Then the user can react and interact with these temporary import items. Then when he says, OK, validate, then you start a new background job that will process all the things to import from temporary table to content items. And when it's done, the background job is done, and also updates the state that you can display to the user. And even to the user, you can display like 10 rows out of 1 million have been imported, and it can every second it can refresh because you have this data somewhere available in the job metadata in the database.
The only thing that I think you have to watch out for is when you put the file, it has to be put on the shared, on like
yeah,
Azure
on the machine that will execute the job,
yeah.
Right? Or in the database, as you said, maybe a table containing the file. Maybe that's what you need to do.
The table contain the.
I don't know, like the same way we do for Lucene, we have. No, for Lucene is when there is a single thing. So you need a shared store. So yeah, so if it's a file, you have no choice. It has to be on one machine that does the import in the background job.
Is there a downside from actually like once you actually take the file, you convert it to data table, it's still in the memory. Now you validate it because you have to validate it. There's no way. I think it won't work without validation. So once you validate it and at least the columns match the expected columns, then you know, hey, at least my process can understand the schema of the file. Instead of writing the file, what is the downside from writing that data table on the database somehow?
Or you have to do that. That's part of that's what I said. You save the file first because that's quick and the request will be quick. Then the background job converts the file to the data table and validates everything. But in the background job.
Well, no. I mean, so when you hit import, so you go here, right? And you hit import and then you attach the file, right? What really happens here is that when you hit upload, the request is processed, right? So the data that's coming in from that file is converted in memory to the table, right?
Yeah, I think it's wrong.
You think it's wrong?
Yeah, because you will hit a timeout. Whatever the number of items is, 100, 1,000, 1 million, there is a number after which you will hit a timeout. Unless you say upload here only uploads the file. Okay. Then you return to the user and say, file has been uploaded. Items of this file are currently being imported in a temporary table for validation. Okay, you say that. And at the same time, you start a background job on the server that does that reads every line of the file and puts them in a temporary table. And at the same time, update the status that you can query from the client to say how many items out of how many items have been imported in the temporary table. And when it's done, the background job stops. The client still refreshes and says, oh, 100% is done in a temporary table. So now you can say, you can send the user back to a page that lists all the items from a temporary table with the validation status. And so it's completely now processed in the data table. Now, at that point, when they have manipulated a temporary table, they can say, okay, go on with that, continue. And then you start a new background job that will process every temporary line to convert it into the actual content item. And when again it's done to 100%, the user will be redirected to the list of content items. But this way you can even stop the browser, close the browser, the background job will still work on the server side. And whatever time it takes, even if you stop the server, then when it starts up again, it will continue where it was, because every time it processes a line, it will mark this line as processed and update the status for the next thing to be done. That's what we do for Lucene indexes, for instance.
How would you flag a row if it's been completed or not?
A custom column in this data temporary table. Validate status, validated, imported, whatever, done, whatever status you want. So whenever you read a line from the Excel file, it creates a line in this temporary table. It has an import ID, a GUID. It has the status, which is maybe validating or validated, or error, like invalid, or transformed, like imported. And then based on that, you can show that thing to the user. And then your background job can say, give me the next item that is validated such that it can import it to the content item. And when it's done, it marks the table, the row as imported, such that you can count how many things have been imported out of how many things are to be imported for the user.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I think when you upload that file or when you write that file, you might want to load or first probably set ID for every row. So you can identify each row.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then before you process.
That and also have an import ID GUID, such that you could have multiple imports going at the same time in the same table, because the table will have to support lots of different imports, maybe one at a time, but at least multiple imports. And so I could see an import ID and a column, a JSON column to have the data, and a column with status. Done.
And if anything fail validation, then you just leave it in the queue for someone to determine, hey, process it, fix it, and process it. Or
maybe, or you just do the validation first for every row, and then you let the user see all these invalidated stuff, and they can say, oh, remove that, or ignore that, or whatever.
No, that's great help. Thanks for the feedback.
But yeah, I'm sure lots of people will need this module or a module like this. And by the way, while you were showing that, I would share the link in the chat. I found an issue with people. Mike Cry, you know Mike Cry, right, Mike? Find an issue because he need something to import, export data, CSV, Excel, whatever. So there is a discussion already about that.
All right.
An issue. Okay, cool.